Further out from here is the South China Sea, a crucial waterway in Asia and a source of regional tensions due to overlapping claims by multiple parties. 7 years ago, on July 12, 2016, an international tribunal ruled largely in favor of the Philippines in its case against China, which claims some 80 to 90% of the sea. But that ruling remains unenforced. In this episode of CNA Correspondent, we find out how this is impacting the Philippines and its people. Fishermen here long for the deep sea. Marine life there is richer compared to the catch within the 15-kilometer municipal waters. But fishermen in this coastal village could not venture out when we visited last December. The seas were rough due to bad weather. There is another reason they stay away. This fishing village in the Philippines' northwestern coast is adjacent to Scarborough Shoal, which was the site of a tense standoff between the Philippines and China back in 2012. Now, that standoff led to the Philippines filing a suit before the Arbitral Tribunal, which ruled in 2016 that China's 9-dash line claim is invalid. It also ruled that Scarborough Shoal is a common fishing ground for artisanal fisherfolk. But fishermen here we spoke to say that one country is getting the upper hand. Scarborough Shoal is located in the South China Sea, a region rich in resources like oil and gas and a vital trading route. The South China Sea is also the site of overlapping claims by the Philippines, China, Taiwan, Brunei, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Deep-sea fishermen we spoke to last December say China Coast Guard vessels are stationed at Scarborough Shoal, strictly guarding the opening of a crucial lagoon. It is fishing boats like the one we're on that are able to venture out into the South China Sea. But fishermen we spoke to say China Coast Guard personnel patrolling Scarborough Shoal are not allowing motherships like this into a crucial lagoon there rich in marine resources. Instead, what they're allowing are smaller boats like this. What that means is the 6 containers of diesel that they used to bring have now doubled into 12 or some 360 liters. That's additional cost for fishermen on top of challenges linked to climate change. Motherships like this can carry upwards of 4 smaller boats. Fisherman Joseph Deruca says it takes 3 hours one way or 4 liters of diesel to travel between the lagoon and mothership.
Mas maganda nga sana naman kung wala sila kasi pati yung motherboat namin, biship namin, nasa loob para hindi na maksay sa diesel. Siyempre lalayo pa ikutan namin. Iikot ka lang 15 miles. O, abala pa yan. O, halimbawa nandun yung mothership namin sa, sa kalagitnaan. Ilayo na namin ikutan namin, 3 oras na yun. Yun pa sanang maisip namin kung nandun lang. Kasi kung nasa loob lang yun, shortcut lang kami.
On board this ship is Captain Marvin Mayo. He has been a fisherman for more than 20 years. When the seas got too rough, he says Scarborough Shoal's lagoon was always a sanctuary. But not anymore, now that motherships cannot enter.
Hindi ka gaanong maayos makapagtago doon kung may masamang panahon. Hindi ka makapasok doon sa loob eh. Halimbawa, tag-norte ngayon, dito ka lang sa south. Yun lang mahirap pag pumihit yung hangin, talaga lipat ka rin doon sa kabila. Kaya hindi ka gaanong safety na doon.
Fishermen say conditions have slowly improved since the standoff in 2012. They say that until 2016, Chinese personnel would take their catch from them. These days, they mainly worry about their smaller boats being barred from entering the lagoon or their fishing lines being cut when they are inside. Aside from Scarborough Shoal, another disputed maritime territory in the South China Sea is the Spratly Islands. The Philippines claims the northeastern part as the Kalayaan. With fewer resources, the Philippines is no match for more powerful nations when it comes to maritime patrols. The U.S. is the Philippines' sole military treaty ally and has committed to come to its aid should its maritime assets come under attack.
As the competition between major powers intensify, the room for maneuver for small states like the Philippines will increasingly diminish. So it's very important that the Philippines try to diversify its foreign policy.
Under Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., China and the Philippines set up a direct line of communications for maritime incidents in the South China Sea. But is seen to be rebalancing towards the U.S., such as by granting Washington access to more Philippine bases. The Philippines, U.S., and Japan held their first ever trilateral maritime exercise in the South China Sea in June, amid growing concerns over perceived Chinese aggression. As state leaders continue to navigate the maritime dispute, fishermen like Joseph are busy preparing for their next trip to Scarborough Shoal. The 500-meter coastline in this part of his village is lined up with larger fishing boats meant for the deep sea. For coastal communities like this, their wishes are simple. Freedom to fish where international law says they could. A joyous farewell for a one-of-a-kind week-long tour at sea that definitely takes some getting used to. I'm with a group of tourists who are paying to set foot on some Philippine-occupied features in the South China Sea. After more than 30 hours, our boat arrives at the disputed Spratly Islands, also known in China as the Nansha Islands. Our first stop, Lawak, or Nanshan Island, a bird sanctuary. Beautiful as this island may be, this is not the tour's main attraction. We can see in this area of the Spratly Islands one China Coast Guard vessel as well as a couple of vessels which our Philippine Navy security escort said were all Chinese. And this has been the sight that tourists on this vessel has been seeing for 30 minutes now.
Ano sabi mo?
Yung Coast Guard nakabuntot na sa atin.
Ano Coast Guard?
Chinese Coast Guard. No! Yeah, I saw it, they're tailing on us.
At its closest, the China Coast Guard vessel was 1.8 kilometers from our tour yacht. As we docked at Philippine-controlled Thitu, known locally as Pagasa Island, our yacht's chief engineer was confused when he received an automated message from a Philippine telecom company welcoming him to China.
Parang hindi ako kasi hindi ko tanggap na hindi naman China ang bakit naka-connected ang isla doon sa China. Kaya medyo kami, Pilipinas pa naman yun, bakit naging China na yun. Yun lang namin.
Although our tour yacht was left alone, we overheard persistent radio challenges between Philippine and Chinese law enforcement personnel in the Spratlys.
Calling Chinese Coast Guard 5403. This is Philippine Navy element in accordance with international laws and Philippine national laws. You are not authorized to conducting maritime patrol or any other activities in this sea area. Be advised to leave the vicinity immediately. Over.
Life for the people caught up in the tensions can be challenging. Fisherman Janelle Hugo says they cannot freely fish near Sandy Cay. A group of 3 uninhabited sandbars claimed by China, Taiwan, Vietnam, and the Philippines. It's located between Thitu and Chinese-held Subi Reef and guarded by China's vessels.
Pinapaalis kami doon pag doon kami banda ng taga-kabilang bansa. Nagagalit sila, tinatawagan kami sa radyo na umalis kami doon dahil sa kanila daw yung lugar na ito. Natatakot din kami pero hindi rin sila makapunta sa mababaw kasi nandun lang din kami sa loob ng bahura. At tapos pagpaalis na, tatimingan lang namin na malayo sila bago kami magsirit pa uwi dito. Yung barko, ilang bisis na kami naharang dyan, yung Coast Guard na dyan ngayon.
During my visit to Thitu, a group of tourists were able to reach and wave the Philippine flag on one of the sandbars of Sandy Cay. But not without the occasional nervousness. Realizing there was no harm, laughter at how scared they were.
From here, you can see that the China Coast Guard vessel is just about over 2 kilometers away, and you can also see other Chinese vessels swarming the area.
For a few minutes, tourists got to enjoy Sandy Cay. In the end, it wasn't the Chinese vessels on guard, but the weather that drove them back to Thitu or Pagasa.
The waves are stronger now, so we've mostly gotten wet on our way back to Pagasa, but the tourists we're with, they're very happy with themselves, with what they were able to do, and they say it seems like there are more water sports activities that can be done in that sandbar, but for now, that might take some time.
Calmer weather eventually came back. I spoke to tour participant and geographer Francois Xavier Bonnet, who says it's high time for the Philippines to develop tourism in the Spratlys.
Countries like Malaysia developed already the tourism in Spratly Islands, especially for Malaysia. It was a Layong resort in the Swallow Reef, and it was really developed only for diving. We know that Vietnam and China, they also developed some kind of tourism, but only for their own nationals.
But China's embassy in Manila told CNA it's against what it calls unilateral action that may escalate the situation. It referred to the declaration on the conduct of parties in the South China Sea signed by China and ASEAN states over 20 years ago, which discourages the act of inhabiting still unoccupied features and warned against action on uninhabited islands and reefs in the Spratlys. But do civilian and fishermen visits to uninhabited South China Sea features count as habitation? We get analysts to weigh in. Academic Greg Polling says they do not, as no fixed structures are set up. Maritime security expert Colin Koh says habitation requires human settlement, but adds the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, leaves it open for interpretation. Stanford University's Ray Powell agrees and points to more ambiguities or gray zones, arguing that large groups of vessels are essentially a floating outpost. We passed through one such group of vessels on my trip to the Spratlys. Experts identified them as Chinese maritime militia vessels, which some nations and think tanks say maintain a persistent presence numbering in the hundreds in the South China Sea. Concern is growing over so-called gray zone tactics, which fall short of military intervention but are aggressive enough to disadvantage weaker states. Such tactics are often attributed to China, whose power dwarfs that of claimant states like the Philippines. A code of conduct to regulate behavior in the disputed waterway, building on the earlier declaration, has been delayed, and this could potentially benefit Beijing, according to one analyst.
As China continues to grow now, it finds itself, it finds it unnecessary really to go forward with such a code of conduct that may restrain its future ambitions, because now it has been able to militarize the South China Sea. China has been able to control the South China Sea short of war.
Until a legally binding code of conduct is agreed upon in the region, ambiguities are likely to remain. It's not every day these Filipino children living in the remote island of Thitu or Pagasa get to see visitors, especially foreigners. But with tourists now able to visit Philippine-occupied features in the South China Sea, these wide-eyed girls and boys could be looking forward to getting more presents. Some 35 families live in this island, internationally known as Thitu, locally called Pagasa. Pagasa in English means hope, and Hope Island is the only island among the Philippine-controlled features in the disputed South China Sea that is occupied by a civilian population. Hope Island is nearly 500 kilometers from Palawan, which is the Philippines' nearest major landmass. The island is the country's biggest and most strategically important outpost in the South China Sea. Vessels carrying mainly construction supplies visit once or twice a month. This means supplies of even essential items are limited and generally more expensive than the rest of the Philippines. I joined a group of women for a market day like no other, carefully watching my step to avoid falling into the ocean's crystal blue waters. The agenda on this construction supply barge to buy bananas brought by some of its crew. Pregnant Thitu resident Adelsa Batancor argues with the crew that she should get more than the others because of her nutritional needs. With the bargaining over, we head back together. I invite her to join me on our team's rented three-wheeler, since transportation is limited on the island. To her, it's just another market day.
Kailangan may kontak ka sa baba. Pag wala ka pong kontak, wala ka rin supplies dadating pag may biyahe po. Kailangan, halimbawa po, sa barge na yan, may kakilala ka, tapos hingin mo yung number, tapos i-chat mo siya o i-text para maka-order ka ng pangarga mo.
Residents like Adelsa face challenges beyond difficulties in procuring supplies. Infrastructure here is limited. No hospital, no fire station, no library, no grocery store, restaurant, or bank. Just the bare minimum. Water, power, Wi-Fi, primary health care, and education until junior high school. Thitu's acting village chief Rene Magbanwa, among those who first settled here in 1996, recalls that the island was just a forest then. With more families here now, he is calling for more funding for infrastructure building.
Sana tulungan na lang kami sa mga project namin na matapos. Sa mga pundo, yun ang mainingi namin. Yun ang kailangan namin dito kasi bitin naman ang pundo namin talaga. Tulad nito po, yung health center namin po, wala pa yung barangay namin. Talaga, barangay hall, wala pa.
Construction for a sheltered port and other facilities is ongoing, but there's also a risk development in the South China Sea, if unstifled, could devastate marine environments. Yet, the overlapping claims in the disputed waterway means conflicting approaches when it comes to marine conservation.
Hello, good afternoon.
I spoke to marine scientist Carmen Ablan Lagman about this. She backs proposals for Philippine-claimed territories in the South China Sea to limit development and strictly regulate fishing to protect fish breeding zones there.
The discussion on biodiversity is always eclipsed by the discussion of extraction of fisheries, of oil and gas plants and concessions, of tourism development, right? And even on claims and who owns what.
One proposal pending before Congress seeks to declare the waters 3 nautical miles around some Philippines' claimed features in the South China Sea as marine protected areas.
If we put that protection name on it, then it will force us to decide what do we really want to go into this area and come up with a major plan, rather than just so many people doing different things all at the same time.
She says some areas can be designated as no fishing zones, or the use of certain types of fishing gear like wide nets can be banned. But with multiple parties staking their claim in the disputed region, there needs to be some agreement to streamline periods of fishing bans and the demarcation of fishing zones. Proposals for an international marine peace park in the Spratlys have surfaced. In the meantime, reclamation by claimant states also poses a huge danger to marine habitats.
You can find pictures of how islands looked like before and how they now look like, where airstrips are established, where buildings are created. It includes a lot of countries, of course, Philippines included, Vietnam, but the biggest is basically the China islands that are being occupied. When they cut certain areas because they want to cement it, you're cutting coral that's been there and grown for millions of years. You're killing habitats.
Near Philippine-controlled Thitu is China-held Subi Reef, where substantial development is visible on its artificial island. While over at another island of the Spratlys called West York or Likas, the Philippines has built a lighthouse amid vast vegetation.
Our agenda today is to go diving, and in this island, it's mostly unexplored, so we'll find where the nice dive spots are.
Underwater in the Spratlys, we saw a variety of small fish. The South China Sea is one of the world's top 5 most productive fishing zones. Due to the remoteness of the Spratlys, some scientists say joint maritime research by different countries is needed to account for and monitor fish stocks here. During our exploratory dives, we also saw dead coral, much of it covered in sediment. While the waters were clear, a lot of the coral was lifeless. As nations race to strengthen infrastructure and military outposts in the South China Sea, marine experts say regional commitments for collective marine protection are sorely needed.